To be told that your body is a ticking time bomb, it was terrifying.
It's just an awful feeling, knowing at any moment she could lose her life.
I was getting more lumps on my back, my thighs, and my abdomen.
He was devastated. We didn't know what we were going to do.
Next, two medical mysteries that defy the experts. When Jesica Blaszczak wakes up with a sky-high fever, she suddenly finds herself facing a terrifying disease that no doctor knows how to stop.
The whole thing was just surreal to me. I was very scared. I felt I pretty much could die any minute.
Then, Jake Tate, a young Air Force sergeant, is at his physical peak when a series of mysterious growths appear all over his body, putting his career and life on the line.
I would be in so much pain that I would literally vomit. I said, I can't live with this any longer.
In the spring of 1999, 22-year-old Jessica Waxman was enjoying single life and her career as a freelance writer. And when she met health policy analyst Dave Blaszczak at a Baltimore nightclub, sparks flew.
Dave was really cute. He was charming, he was funny, and I could just tell right away he was a good guy.
I was attracted to her, and she seemed really nice, and we hit it off from there.
Dave and Jessica date for the next 5 years. And in the fall of 2004, they get married. Soon after, they settle into a new home. The newlyweds couldn't be any happier.
We like going out to parks, hanging out with our dog, just doing a lot of stuff outside. Jessica was always in good health. She never had any type of sickness.
But then, one day in June of 2006, Jessica finds herself under the weather.
I just felt unbelievably tired. I started to get really cold to the point where I was shivering. I'd had the chills. I just thought, well, you know what? I probably have the flu. So I decided to just take some over-the-counter painkillers and just sleep it off.
I became concerned when I arrived home after work. When I checked her temperature, she had a 105 fever. It seemed dangerously high. And I thought, we definitely need to go to the hospital.
They let us in right away. They told me I was severely dehydrated. And they gave me an IV. They just did basic tests and just thought I had a virus.
They gave her over-the-counter fever-reducing medicine, and the fever went down, and sent her on her way.
I actually felt a little relieved that they thought it was nothing. But that night, the fevers came back.
And over the next few days, her temperature continues to fluctuate. Jessica grows increasingly worried that she's been hit by something far more dangerous than a simple virus.
I had a general feeling of nausea and just overwhelming sickness and fever. I probably had about 101 fever when I woke up. Around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they would spike. They would go all the way up to 104, and it was scary.
We tried over-the-counter fever-reducing medicine, but the fever kept coming back, and nothing was improving.
I called the doctor, and he said that I needed to just try to let it run its course, and I would feel better.
Exhausted from the constant temperature shifts, Jessica does her best to work whenever her fever is down. But it isn't long before a disturbing new symptom sets in.
I got a very bad headache. If you can picture worse than a migraine, this was it. A searing pain. In the front of my head and in the back of my head and over my eyes. And all I see is kind of like when somebody takes a picture, you see the flashes.
I've never seen Jessica this sick before, and I felt that we had to do something.
He said to me, "You need to go back to the hospital."
I rushed her straight to the ER.
When we got to the emergency room, they could see that I was just in unbelievable amounts of pain. Because I was having headaches, they performed a lot of scans. They performed CTs. They performed x-rays. Every single test came back negative.
And then they put her on high doses of IV antibiotics, just in case she had a bacteria or virus in her body.
I was very frustrated at this point. I thought, am I gonna figure out what's wrong with me?
12 hours later, the medical team begins to suspect that Jesica has meningitis, an inflammation of the protective membranes that cover the spinal cord. It can be caused by a virus or bacteria and may be fatal.
Meningitis was considered a possibility because of the headaches and the fever. This was the first time that I thought, oh my God, I could have something really serious.
The thought of her possibly having meningitis was very unsettling to us and upsetting. They wanted to perform a spinal tap to find out if she definitely had meningitis.
The whole thing was just surreal to me. I was very scared.
We had to wait several hours for the results from the doctor. It was very nerve-wracking. I was very worried, but it was negative, and it was a big relief that she didn't have meningitis. But it felt like we were back to square one and didn't know what was wrong with her.
The antibiotic was helping. The fever was still there, but it wasn't as bad. I think it was probably around 101, and my headaches were gone. So they said, okay, well, you're stable. You seem to be getting better. We'll send you home. I was pretty frustrated at that point. I knew I needed a second opinion. I saw an infectious disease doctor 2 days after our hospital visit.
Jesica walks her through everything she's experienced over the past 3 weeks. And after performing a thorough exam, the doctor comes to a startling conclusion.
It was very surprising to me. They thought I had leptospirosis.
Leptospirosis is a rare infection caused by Leptospira, a bacteria found in fresh water that's been contaminated by animal urine.
Leptospirosis did make sense, because Dave and I did go kayaking a couple weeks before I got sick.
The doctor immediately orders a blood test. And 3 tense hours later, the findings come in negative for leptospirosis. Baffled, she consults with her team, and soon after suggests an even more alarming possibility.
She thought it might be cancer. And that's when things got really scary.
Some of her symptoms did match up with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was having night sweats, she had spikes in the fever.
My mom passed away from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so it brought back a whole lot of memories that were very unpleasant.
The fact that cancer is now a possibility terrified us.
Over the past 3 weeks, 30-year-old Jesica Blaszczak has been suffering from extremely high fevers and overwhelming fatigue. Despite performing multiple tests, her doctors aren't sure what's going on. But now, one specialist has dropped a bombshell. Jesica may have cancer.
They did a blood test to see her white blood cell count. Also, they did a full-body PET scan that would highlight if there was any type of cancerous tumors within her body.
They give you an IV. It's a radioactive fluid that courses through your veins, and then they just scan your body. And after the test, you're so scared to hear the result.
It was absolutely agonizing, and we couldn't wait till the actual results came back.
We talked about how this could affect us, what could happen if I did have cancer, you know, what we would do, and we deal day by day with what happens. They let me know the next day that I did not have cancer.
To hear that was an absolute relief.
It was a huge weight off my shoulders, huge.
But we were very frustrated that we weren't getting any answers and nobody could figure out why she is having these type of symptoms.
As the days went on, I felt worse. I had muscle aches, the constant feeling of sickness, of nausea, of weakness. I felt I couldn't catch my breath sometimes.
Even worse, her temperature keeps fluctuating.
When the fever would spike to 105, I would get super cold. And I'd have to just go under the covers and try to just get warm again. And then when my fever would break, I would get very hot. So it was a cycle.
The fever was taking a toll on her daily activities, and she was spending a lot of time in bed, sweating and bundled up.
You feel helpless. You feel like there's nothing you can do. After having 105 fevers every day, it gets to the point where, like, you're thinking, geez, am I gonna wake up tomorrow? It's just really scary.
Desperate to help Jessica, Dave devotes himself to researching doctors and soon comes across a highly respected internist he thinks his wife should meet, Dr. Abby Mae Miller.
Jessica first went to see Dr. Miller about 3 weeks after she was released from the hospital.
When I went to see Dr. Miller, my fever was probably around 104. I ran a fever all day long.
I've never seen a patient with such a persistent fever before. The fever itself isn't so dangerous, but most of the causes for a fever that persists can be dangerous. So I wanted to repeat her blood cultures.
But the findings shake Jessica to the core.
A couple days later, I got a call from Dr. Miller. She goes, this could be very serious. You have bacteria in your blood.
Bacteria in the blood can cause a syndrome called sepsis, and Jessica ended up septic. So I recommended that she go immediately to the emergency room.
Sepsis is a serious bacterial infection in the bloodstream. If left untreated, it can result in death.
I was pretty freaked out. We didn't really know how to feel, but we knew that whatever we had to do, it needed to be done fast. When I was rushing to the hospital, it was surreal. Dr. Miller met us at the hospital. We were admitted immediately. They treated me with high doses of antibiotics, very high doses. As soon as I got on the antibiotics, my fever was reduced, 101, as opposed to 104.
But while Dr. Miller tries to get the life-threatening sepsis under control, she finds herself grappling with an entirely new problem.
I did another physical exam, and she had a very loud heart murmur. And that was different than previous exams. It can be associated with some serious heart problems.
A heart murmur is an irregularity in the heartbeat. It can be a sign of infection, disease, or valve problem, any of which can prove fatal.
That was a big shock to us.
I was like, what? A heart condition? Nobody's even mentioned anything like that. It was terrifying. I pretty much could die any minute.
Jesica Blaszczak is in a horrifying state. She just learned that she's septic. A deadly bacteria is coursing through her body. And 2 hours after being admitted to the hospital, her doctor has discovered that she has a dangerous heart murmur. Now, cardiologist Dr. Michael Notarianni has taken over her case.
When I first met Jessica, she was very sick. Once bacteria is in the bloodstream, it's important to look at everywhere where you could possibly have infections. Certainly the heart is one of the areas where infections can hide.
Dr. Notarianni thinks he may know what's behind Jessica's mysterious decline. But to confirm his hunch, he needs to get a clear look at her heart.
A TE is a transesophageal echocardiogram, where we place an ultrasound probe at the end of a tube. That tube is then inserted into the esophagus and brought down to the stomach and to the level of the heart so that we can see the heart a lot more close up. The transesophageal echocardiogram confirmed the diagnosis of endocarditis.
Endocarditis is a life-threatening infection of the heart. In a healthy individual, when bacteria enters the bloodstream, the immune system fights it off. But in patients like Jessica, for unknown reasons, bacteria lodges on the valves in their heart. Blood then clots around the bacteria, forming a dense growth that antibiotics can't reach, which can lead to both sepsis and potentially fatal damage to the heart.
Once the vegetation is formed, the heart valve can then not open and close correctly. In addition, it can just start to destroy the actual structure of the valve, so the valve itself does not work the way it's supposed to work.
I was completely floored, but the fact that they finally found out what was wrong with me was a huge weight off my shoulders.
While Dr. Notoriani can't know for sure, he suspects that the disease started with a structural abnormality in Jessica's heart that she was never aware of.
On the transesophageal echocardiogram that was performed on Jessica, we did see mitral valve prolapse as part of her findings, and so she probably did have that before the infection started.
And once the infection entered her bloodstream and latched onto the valve, Jessica's immune system went into overdrive.
Your body's mechanisms for fighting infection include fevers. Raising the temperature is one way of killing off infections. Headaches would accompany that because of the body's attempt to fight the infection that's there.
While doctors tried to keep her symptoms in check with antibiotics, they only helped so much because they couldn't get to the source of her infection, the vegetation on her valve.
The clot also blocks blood flow to the center of the bacteria, and you need blood flow in order to get the antibodies in to kill off the bacteria.
Eventually, her infection escalated and became so severe that Jessica became dangerously septic.
The infection spread throughout the entire body.
And to make matters worse, as the bacterial growth on her heart mushroomed, it began tearing her mitral valve apart.
A torn valve in your heart leads to increased pressures in the top chamber of your heart, which can then force more pressure into your lungs and lead to complications. If Jessica's condition had not been eventually diagnosed, she would have developed congestive heart failure. She would then not have been able to breathe, and eventually her heart would have stopped.
I feel like I'm the luckiest person ever, because if they didn't find out when they did, I would have died.
With a massive growth of bacteria threatening to shut her heart down, it's imperative that Dr. Notoriani operate as soon as possible.
While prolonged antibiotics might be able to cure her infection, because of the size of her vegetation, it would need to be cut out. And because the valve was torn, it would need to be surgically repaired.
I never thought I would ever be 30 years old and have to go through open heart surgery. It was insane.
Unfortunately, the medical team can't perform the complicated surgery until they deal with an even more pressing issue, the sepsis that's flooding Jessica's bloodstream.
It is dangerous to operate on somebody who is septic. Their body is fighting the infection. It doesn't have the ability to recover as easily.
They couldn't perform the surgery right away because she had bacteria all throughout her system, and they needed to eliminate that before they did open heart surgery.
In a race against time, Dr. Notoriani immediately doubles Jessica's dose of antibiotics, hoping to eliminate the infection before her valve literally blows out.
To be told that your body is a ticking time bomb, that your body is essentially working against itself, it scared the hell out of me.
I was absolutely terrified. It's just an awful feeling knowing that at any moment she could lose her life.
Jesica Blaszczak has just learned that a bacterial growth on her heart valve has been damaging her heart and poisoning her bloodstream over the past 3 months. Now, she's undergoing a course of antibiotics to combat the lethal infection so that surgeons can operate. But at any given moment, her valve could collapse.
After 3 days of being on the antibiotics, Jessica was finally cleared for the surgery.
I was very scared something would go wrong and I would never wake up from this kind of surgery.
I felt very helpless when she was being wheeled into surgery. At that point, there's nothing that I could do. It's all in the hands of the doctors. Pray for the best.
Once the surgeons gain access to the heart valve itself, the mass is actually just cut out with a scalpel. And then the mitral valve was sutured back together again.
After 6 grueling hours, the surgeon pronounces the operation a success.
They were able to remove the bacteria to save her valve. It was a huge relief knowing that the surgery went well.
When I woke up, I was fine. Thank God.
Jesica was able to go home about a week after the surgery.
I had to be on antibiotics for a month to make sure that all of the bacteria was out of my system.
Jessica's prognosis now is excellent. She has recovered completely from the surgery.
I didn't sustain any lasting damage. My heart is completely back to normal.
Thrilled as she is to be alive and healthy, Jessica can't help but wonder why it took so long to get a solid diagnosis.
In retrospect, endocarditis is something that is detectable. It's very frustrating to think about how come so many experts miss the diagnosis. I had all the textbook signs of endocarditis, but nobody noticed.
She is very atypical in that she did not have any of the usual risk factors that we knew of. Diagnosing endocarditis is tricky because of the presentation. Fevers can be caused by lots of different things.
I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think that I'm lucky to be here. And I appreciate the fact that somebody found it.
Today, Jessica is symptom-free and as active as ever.
She's back to living a very normal, healthy lifestyle, but she is definitely still at high risk for developing endocarditis again in the future. She needs to take antibiotic before she does any type of procedures that could possibly introduce bacteria back into her bloodstream.
I feel fantastic. I feel like I'm finally back to myself. It's been 3 years since the surgery, and I have a healthy heart.
She was extremely brave and courageous for everything that she went through, and I care about her very much.
I think you have to really listen to your body. If you feel sick, if you feel something is wrong, follow up with it, because it might be something serious. You might not be able to sleep it off. I'm just so unbelievably lucky. I thank God every day that I made it through, and I made it through healthy.
While Jesica Blaszczak went to the doctor soon after her symptoms first set in, Jake Tate ignored an onslaught of bizarre growths until a crisis forced him to face the horrifying truth. In August of 2006, 20-year-old Jake Tate, a one-time star basketball player, was focused on winning something bigger than a game: the girl of his dreams.
Heidi and I met at a restaurant we were both working at in Knoxville. I knew she was the one.
Jake was very athletic. He's a very good-looking guy. He's 6'6", and he has one of the most determined, hardworking natures, and he won't let anything stand in his way.
I asked to take her to dinner after work, and she introduced me to her son, Benjamin.
And when I saw how sweet he was with Ben, it was just immediate.
Heidi and I dated for 9 months before I proposed. We got married in Vegas on May 29th.
And almost as soon as they return from their honeymoon, Jake makes a momentous decision.
I knew that I had to have a better job to support my wife and child. So in June in 2007, I decided to join the Air Force to do tech school for meteorology. After basic training, I was stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's kind of like really strict college. You go to class every day, and you learn how to forecast meteorology. To think that you complete 2 years of college in 8.5 months is pretty crazy. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get ready for school, and the day ends about 3 o'clock. And then you do PT till about 6. It's constant physical and mental strain.
Over the next several months, Jake slowly adapts to the demanding routine. He has no clue that his life is about to spin out of control.
I was in the shower and I noticed that I had a small lump that was the size of an eraser on a number 2 pencil. It was protruding from the right side of my abdomen. I thought maybe I hurt myself exercising. I just kind of thought it'll go away.
Putting the strange growth out of his mind, Jake throws himself into the training program harder than ever. But over the next month, a dozen more lumps begin to form on his abdomen.
The lumps were kind of like small marbles underneath my skin. If I just kind of put my finger on one, put a little pressure behind it, it caused me a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain.
I first noticed that there was something wrong with Jake when he was rubbing his side and making a face. And and I could feel that there was definitely a hard knot underneath the skin. Almost felt like a cyst of some kind.
I thought, well, can't be that big a deal. It's probably stress or something, because this is the most stress that I'd ever felt in my life. And I just didn't really want to go to the doctor.
But as winter drags on, more and more painful lumps appear at an alarming rate.
By that time, I probably had about 40 lumps. To cope with the pain, I started using a heating pad at night. I also would take hot showers and hot baths, and it really helped.
It was important to me that Jake seek medical help because at this point, it was obvious that this was something that wasn't normal.
I really just didn't want to go to the doctor, and I was going to continue to do what I'd been doing, ignore them, because I was still so young and new in the Air Force, and I was afraid that something like this could possibly get me kicked out.
Determined to maintain his status in the Air Force, Jake focuses on his studies, and in the spring, he graduates with flying colors. Soon after, he lands his first military assignment.
I moved to South Carolina to Shaw Air Force Base to start my job as a meteorologist.
When we initially got to South Carolina, there seemed to be a pause in the symptoms.
It was a lot more warm and dry in South Carolina. The heat and the lack of humidity and the lack of stress as I had learned my job and I was doing well at it. And so I started feeling a lot better. The lumps would become smaller in size and they would hurt less.
We thought maybe it was just going to take care of itself at this point.
As the lumps seem to shrink with each passing day, Jake and Heidi breathe a huge sigh of relief. Unfortunately, the reprieve is short-lived.
In late October, early November, I was getting more lumps. On my back, my thighs, and my abdomen.
These symptoms that he was having came back as strong as they had ever been before we left, and for the most part worse.
At this point, we actually started counting. Heidi and I would go through and take a highlighter and mark each lump. I've had about 60 of them. The hurt was like a stabbing sensation.
He was in such extreme pain that he was almost in tears. And that's just not my husband.
There were some times when I would be in so much pain that I would literally vomit. I would start throwing up because I hurt so bad.
He was withdrawing himself from the family, and he was short with us, whereas he would never have been that way before. I suggested that Jake go see a doctor. I was pushing him to go. But Jake was in complete denial about it, and he didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to talk about it.
I really didn't want the Air Force to find out. I was afraid that they would take away my job. I was afraid that I would get in trouble at this point because I'd kept it quiet so long, and there's not like you wake up overnight and have so many lumps.
At this point, our lives and his life had been totally turned upside down. He needed to go to the doctor.
Over the last year, strange lumps have been growing rapidly all over Jake Tate's body, but he still hasn't seen a doctor. Afraid that a medical problem will disqualify him from his Air Force job, Jake is determined to live stoically with the mysterious, painful disease. But it just keeps getting worse.
My lumps seemed to hurt more. They started getting extremely painful.
I was pushing him to see a doctor. I threatened him and told him that I was going to go and tell his supervisor.
And so I decided it would be best to go ahead and go to the doctor.
In the winter, almost a year from when the first lump appeared, Jake finally schedules an appointment off base.
When I went to see the dermatologist, I had 156 lumps. I said, I can't live with this any longer. And I explained to him, anytime I put pressure on him, I'm in excruciating pain. He said that he had never seen this many lumps on one person. He was shocked. The dermatologist told me that the best idea would be to biopsy him just to make sure that there was nothing else going on. And I thought, maybe it could be some kind of cancer.
I thought about my husband and whether or not we're going to be able to be 70 years old and walking down the street together. But I had to put those kinds of thoughts out of my head because it can devastate you.
Finally, after an anxious 48 hours, the test results are in.
He could tell that it was non-cancerous.
It was an overwhelming relief.
And he told me they were lipomas.
Lipomas are fatty lumps. They are usually not painful, and their cause is unknown.
The dermatologist said they're not really sure why they form, but if they're irritating you, then we can start cutting them out. And if we do them in 2-week increments, it shouldn't take us more than a year to get all of these out. It seemed like a dream come true that this guy could solve my problem so easily. So I was gung-ho. I went back the next week, and then he proceeded to give me a local anesthetic around the area. We cut 2 out that day.
We were hopeful that everything was going to be easy and life would go back to normal.
But just when Jake thinks he has things under control, he goes in for a follow-up visit and finds himself blindsided by a horrifying new development.
The spot where he had taken out the first 2, there was about 4 to 5 lipomas, or lumps, where the 2 original had been. They were multiplying. It was like a piece of popcorn, where it's just a bunch of little bulbs sticking out off the sides.
We were shocked as to what was going on and why it had happened right in that same spot. Jake seemed very disheartened and frustrated.
At that point, I asked if there was another treatment that I could look into. Since they were growing back faster than he could cut them out, he said that what I might try is liposuction.
Determined to leave no stone unturned, Jake and Heidi immediately set up an appointment with a plastic surgeon.
The plastic surgeon did a thorough exam and said that I did have a lot of lipomas. It wasn't something he had seen before, but it was pretty rare to have that many that were causing pain.
The plastic surgeon told us there was absolutely no way that liposuction would work. That if they were multiplying from having them removed, that it would only be worse with liposuction. He basically said that there was nothing that he could do for him. When Jake left, he was devastated. The weight that we thought was going to be lifted was 10 times worse because now we didn't know what we were going to do.
I was in a lot of pain constantly, and things were only getting worse.
And then I said to him that maybe we should make another appointment to go see the doctor on base. And so that's when he went and he met with Dr. Judy.
When I first saw Jake, he was scared, overwhelmed, and a little despondent. He was looking for answers. I took a history, and then one by one, he showed me where he had these painful lumps.
When I saw Dr. Judy, I had about 200 lipomas.
Jake had lipomas all over his body, from his arms to his chest to his abdomen to his legs, on his back, and they would range in size from a pea all the way up to a golf ball. I was overwhelmed. I'd never seen anything like it before.
Over the last year, more than 200 agonizing lumps have surfaced on Jake Tate's body, and no doctor can explain what's wrong with him. Now he's in the hands of Dr. Carrie Judy, who is completely shocked by what she's seeing.
Never in my life had I seen a patient with that many lipomas before. Anytime I would touch any of his lipomas, he would wince, and I wasn't honestly quite sure what to do. I was very concerned because I knew that Jake was active duty military, and you have to be fit to fight, and I knew this would impact his career if there wasn't a cure.
But before she can deal with Jake's future, Dr. Judy needs to get his pain under control.
She prescribed him pain medication that helped him feel better.
And I tried to find out if there was anybody that knew more about it than I did.
After leaving Dr. Judy, I was definitely a lot more positive.
Over the next 2 weeks, she spends countless hours trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And now, Dr. Judy thinks she may have found an expert who can answer all of their questions. Dr. Karen Herbst.
She actually specializes in fatty disorders, things that are a little bit rare and a little bit more difficult to treat.
We scheduled an opportunity for me to meet with Dr. Herbst. That was a great feeling. Dr. Herbst did a full body exam. She went over every lipoma and checked me out from head to toe.
When I examined his trunk, he was exquisitely tender. When I would touch him, he would wince and shift his body. Based on Jake's painful lipomas, I gave him a diagnosis of Dercum's disease.
Dercum's disease is a rare disorder in which the body forms acutely painful lipomas. In a healthy individual, small amounts of fluid containing toxins continually leak from blood vessels and are easily flushed out of the body. But in patients like Jake, for some unknown reason, too much fluid is released and settles between cells, creating inflammation. To clean up the toxic fluid, the body sends blood cells to the rescue. And to feed those cells, it produces fat, which gradually builds up into solid growths.
If you have a vessel that leaks fluid, that fluid should normally leave, but if it doesn't, then it's going to sit in that area and stay. It's like you take the garbage out to the street, but it never gets picked up by the garbage truck. So it starts to almost ferment in the tissue. It becomes more and more toxic, and it sends signals out to cells called macrophages to come in and clean up the mess. They eat up all of the garbage that's in the tissue. These macrophages need to have food themselves. So the fat in the areas of the lipoma most likely grows in order to feed the cells that have accumulated in that tissue itself.
My gut reaction to finding out that I actually had Dercum's disease was to jump up and cheer. I was really happy that I found out what was wrong with me.
I thought about where we were going to go from here. I was hopeful for the future.
While much about Dercum's is a mystery, Dr. Herbst is one of the world's foremost experts on it, and she suspects that Jake may be genetically predisposed to the disease.
My understanding is likely there's been a mutation in a gene that's passed down amongst family members, and that causes the blood vessels and fat tissue to respond differently to inflammation.
Dr. Herbst also has a theory about what triggered the onset of Dercum's in Jake's case.
He had just undergone boot camp and an extreme amount of physical activity. When you undergo physical activity, you produce a lot of lactic acid, and then it's taken to the liver and it's metabolized. Well, in someone who has Dercum's disease, the lactic acid is released outside of the cell, but then it just sits there.
And the more Jake exercised, the worse his symptoms became. But surprisingly, they improved during the hot summer in South Carolina.
The heat probably helps Jake because it dilates the blood vessels, and dilation actually draws more fluid from the tissue back into the blood vessels, and it gives a little bit of relief to the nerves during that period of time.
But even physicians on the cutting edge of research like Dr. Herbst don't understand why Dercum's is so painful. However, she can explain why the lipomas multiplied when Jake had them surgically excised.
When you remove the lipoma, you leave behind an area of inflammation. Whenever there's inflammation, there's an over-responsiveness of the body. Inflammation in the area of surgery stimulates leakage and fluid to accumulate. So having lipomas removed in Dercum's disease causes a vicious cycle of growth of fat.
Despite the harsh reality of the disease, Jake is aware that his prognosis would have been dire if he hadn't been diagnosed when he was.
The worst case scenario with Dercum's disease is somebody who is unable to handle the excess amount of fluid in their body. So as the fluid builds up over time, it also fills up in the lung, and that can actually lead to death.
The grim truth is there's no medication that can shrink the lipomas, and no surgery that will permanently remove them.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for Dercum's disease.
This is a lifelong problem, so these should continue to grow over time.
When the realization hit that Jake was going to have to live with this disease for the rest of his life, and that the lumps were going to continue to multiply, it's devastating.
I wanted to cry because I knew that this was going to be a long, hard battle.
But Dr. Herbst also has some good news for Jake and Heidi. There are ways that they can manage the symptoms.
I can make a number of recommendations to possibly decrease some of the fluid in his tissue and enable Jake to have as long of a life as somebody who doesn't have Dercum's disease. He should avoid physical activity, and he needs to decrease the amount of stress in his life.
He has to change every aspect of his life.
While Jake is grateful to finally know how to cope with his devastating condition, he can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to give him a solid diagnosis.
We really don't receive education on how to diagnose fat disorders. A doctor would look at it and say, you have multiple lipomas, don't worry about it, go on home.
Today, Jake is bravely living with his condition. Unfortunately, he may have to give up the job that has meant so much to him.
I really don't want to leave the Air Force, but I'm not able to do all the physical things that I was before.
Jake's case is currently under medical review to determine whether or not he'll be able to continue serving in the military. In the meantime, Jake and Heidi are focused on raising their family. They now have 2 children.
It's really important to me to be a role model for my kids. As a father, my sons especially look up to me.
I know that this is something that is going to be with us forever, and I really hate that for him.
My wife and I recently just counted again. I'm up to 815 lipomas now. Currently, I'm taking 2 different kinds of pain medicine. It helps me be able to perform everyday tasks like pick my kid up. And so the medications have definitely helped with stuff like that.
Despite the uncertainties they face, Jake and Heidi are closer than ever.
Everything that's happened has made our marriage so much stronger, and it made me love him so much more.
I had learned always search for the answer that fits for you best. Never give up and try to stay positive.
We're optimistic about the future. We're going to try to make the best of what we've been given.